So good evening, everybody. We look forward tonight to conclude, that is the 42nd chapter, which we've been on it for quite some time. As we mentioned in the past, yes, indeed, it is a lengthier chapter, and I look forward to conclude this tonight. Hadran Aloch, as the expression goes, but Hadran, we will review it, we'll internalize it as all the chapters. Every chapter has its uniqueness, and it is a fundamental chapter. Again, you can say it in every single chapter in Tanya, but individually, and to appreciate every message of every chapter accordingly. Though we do notice time and again the precise sequence and Alter Rebbe's choice of order and the sequence of chapter after chapter, how it connects to the overall message of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe talking to the Beinani, which is the Beinani is a leho kol adam yimshech. We all ought to strive to be the Beinani, or to be the Beinani, but yet there's something unique in every single chapter on its own, and indeed for the 42nd chapter is, as we focus on this chapter itself, it's definitely something extremely fundamental in the message, in its message, in the context of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with Hashem. So as we always mention, you could find all the previous classes on this tanyaonline.com website, including the first 10 classes, or the 10 classes prior to today's class, and then all the other chapters in Tanya. I mention this because for newcomers, it's easy to follow. It's a website that it's easy to follow as it's set up, that the text is in a separate scroll bar, and as such, easy to move along and appreciate the information of our holy Tanya. I do mention all the time that there's an easy access to every single chapter from the very beginning of the Tanya, and as well, it's literally a click away. There's a separate scroll bar which has literally begins from the very beginning, and you're able to follow it in the same exact fashion accordingly. So we are holding Va'af Shehu Al Yedei Hislapshus El Ha'ikar, which is Samach Aleph, page Samach Aleph in the original text. You can see it on the corresponding text, English text, that is. I will just note before we go on, you do notice that there's the Hagah, that note on the side of the Tanya, which the Alter Rebbe, we're not going to do this textually, but we're going to just say the message over here. It's interesting, the Alter Rebbe does note that when he speaks about, as again we learned last week, to briefly recap, additional to whatever was said before, they'll adds that the melech, from a melech basar v'dam, from a in other words, one should always remember that when we speak about appreciating HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even though one can say, okay, you have the Moshe within you, so you're able to literally see Hashem, you're able to identify Hashem similar to Moshe Rabbeinu, that's very stark, it's a potent message over here, or there's a message of profound potency, if you will, because you're telling every Yid that because of the Moshe within you, you have that transparency, of the clarity of Elokus, like Moshe Rabbeinu. Remember, Moshe Rabbeinu, the Gemara points out that when he had a constant appreciation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on a constant basis, the Gemara points out like something striking. The Jewish people then in the Am Yisrael at the desert at that point could not. There's those few were impure, and they complained or lamented that they can't do that Pesach sacrifice, the Korban Pesach. And that was the one time they did it in the desert, in the 40 years of the desert, they turned to Moshe Rabbeinu and they said, Lamani Gora, why should we miss out on this opportunity? And Moshe Rabbeinu turns to Hashem and extracts Kaviyachol from Hashem that to 613th mitzvah, which is the mitzvah Pesach Sheni, the second chance, which is the second Pesach, literally translated, that those who were impure the first, the month of Nisan, the month of Iyar, the corresponding date, Yudalad Iyar, they're able to bring the Korban Pesach, and which was again comforting for those who lamented. But the Gemara says something interesting, and Rashi brings it, says, wow, that was fascinating. So this wasn't, so just a little backdrop of this very mitzvah, and even though it's not part of this not at all part of the scope of today's class, but just to understand, it's not like there was always the 613 mitzvahs. It existed always. It was that in this particular mitzvah, Hashem wanted to come as an arousal from below, from those who are lamenting. They're bothered by the fact that they cannot fulfill that mitzvah, they cannot bring that Korban Pesach. But the way the evolution of that mitzvah was that Yidden turned to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu again extracts that mitzvah which was there already. He was there with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because Hashem and His Torah, and all His mitzvahs are essentially one. So Hashem was always there, no one brought about. Hashem brought us about, we didn't bring about Hashem. Hashem is Levadiyim Lechneira. But and so too is Hashem's mitzvahs. They're always there. They're part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What Hashem wanted, again, the evolution of this mitzvah should be through the Yidden, through the Amis, through Am Yisrael. So the way it was, but the Gemara points out how fascinating it is that Yidden turned to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to Moshe Rabbeinu. They lament, and Moshe Rabbeinu said, just a moment, Imdu, the lashon of the pasuk, expression of the pasuk, Imdu, just a moment, Veshma, I want to just find out HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what Hashem has to say. Turns to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem gives him this mitzvah. The Pesach Sheni turns to Am Yisrael. You got it. You have the Pesach Sheni, and so on. And Rashi Gemara says, "Ashri Yeludisha, fortunate as a human being, born as a human being, could have that transparency, that clarity with Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Turned to Hakadosh Baruch Hu within a moment. Didn't go up to the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. So that itself is fascinating, understandably. Torah witnesses, lechem le'yochel, mayim le'shos, they didn't drink water, they didn't eat bread, fasted for 40 days, 3 times consecutively. And obviously this is fascinating about Moshe Rabbeinu, but somewhat there was a psychological, emotional preparation in order to receive the Torah. And again, the fact that he goes up in the mountain and he secludes himself from reality here, it's just, okay, he's talking to Am Yisrael, they're lamenting, just a moment, let me just talk to Hashem, and he gets that mitzvah. He's able to extrapolate, he's able to extract that mitzvah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Gemara says, wow, that was cool, if you will. That was interesting. That's Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu has that clarity, kind of a riyah, a vision. He's able to see eye to eye. Well, could you see totally? You can't. Hashem says himself, "Upanei lo yiro." Anybody, the pnimis of HaKadosh Baruch Hu lo yiro, but nonetheless, he had that vision in the lukus, and that is what is in that Moshe Rabbeinu, which is embedded in every single. It also has that. I mean, this is the message. You've got to see the entire flow of the Alter Rebbe in this very chapter to appreciate the message. But that's basically what the Alter Rebbe is saying. The Moshe, which exists within every single Yid, he's able to have that riyah, that clarity, which, as such, revering Hashem, the awe of Hashem, is something so natural by the Yid because he sees Hashem one way or another. So the Alter Rebbe adds, last week we began, we're talking about seeing Hashem. So that transparency in Hashem, so the Alter Rebbe says, when you say transparency, it doesn't mean like, okay, I could pinpoint my finger, here it is. That's not necessarily, for that matter, not always that's the maximum appreciation of vision, that you could look at something physical, because something that's physical could have a facade, which the message of this which you're so appreciating is just the opposite in the way you appreciate it, the way you understand it and perceive it, because it could be a physical cover up on what it's really all about. True vision, or from a certain perspective, vision in this fashion carries a lot of weight and a lot of a sense of clarity, something not necessarily you can touch with your own fingers. It's a certain energy which is beyond the tangibility of the physical. But nonetheless, it doesn't compromise on that clarity at all. And this is Alter Rebbe says, you think about a king, and the reverence of a king, the awe of a king, it is associated with the physical body, or it's the kingship, or that reign, that royalty, the regality which comes via this body. So the body is kind of a conduit to which the kingdom, the kingship rather, that regality is manifest. So when you look at the king, the Alter Rebbe says when he's sleeping, and we mentioned last week, it doesn't mean he's sleeping for a few moments. You know that it's the same king which you experienced before and is going to wake up later. Ein shum yireh mimenu. So let's say it's a sleeping dynamic, sleeping king sleeping forever, let's say. There's no fear from him. There's no awe, because what do you see? You only see the body. It's when he's awake, so the kingship spirit, the spirit of kingship is manifest through this body. That's where the awe is aroused. That's where the reverence is aroused. So could you pinpoint that regality? Could you pinpoint that spirit of authority or kingship? Talking about a good, true king, in other words, not a tyranny type of human king dictating and oppressing. And we're talking about a regular, healthy. Today we don't find this idea of king-subject relationship as much, certainly not in the West, but conceptually we can appreciate this as something which is a man of royalty. Himself coming from a royal, a chain of royalty, tracing back from all the way from his ancestors. There's royal blood, and so it does arouse a certain sense of fear and reverence. But could you touch and pinpoint and say, "Oh, this is it, that's it"? No, it's beyond that. Alter Rebbe used the lashon rias einei basar. It's rias haseichel. It's the vision of an appreciation of the intellectual eye, as opposed to the physical eye, and that's not necessarily is that less than seeing what you see with your physical eye, at all, for that matter, because when you look at this person of regal composure, regal nature, a dynasty coming from all the way back of royalty, it's not something you can say, from here to here, that's where the royalty is. That's what's causing my reverence. Like you say, when you pinpoint on something which is physical, this physical, so you say here and from here to here, this is the piece which contributed so much to my life, as an example. This computer, whatever it is. But in this case, it's beyond that. Because it's not about the physical body of the king. It's about the royalty, which is manifest, which is transmitted, which is manifested via the body. And that royalty and that kingship is not something which you can pinpoint with a finger. Your awe comes from something which is beyond the touching with your own fingers, something which is something which you can see with your physical eye. And that vision is you could equally identify that clarity, that transparency of vision, the rias einei haseichel, seeing something with your intellectual eye to saying this is what you see with your physical eye. And that's basically the message, and that's what Alter Rebbe says. Yeah, we see HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but what do we actually see? We see the clouds, the sun, the moon, the entire creation. But no, the Alter Rebbe says, yeah, this is the outer garment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But right there, the Hashem is right there. This is His garments. We mentioned last week. Someone's going to say, "Well, I saw He's expressing his interaction with the king in the middle of January, when the king was wearing a sweater, a coat, a garment, a coat, and so on. Someone says, well, you didn't experience the king really as much as I did, because I saw him in the summer when he wasn't wearing that coat. That's nonsense, because it's the Guf HaMelech B'Seichem, it's the king rather. It's the same king. It's irrelevant if he comes out with one coat, one sweater, two sweaters, a sweater and a coat, or not wearing a coat or a sweater at all. Because it's the Guf HaMelech, the same thing. What we see physically is the outer garments of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But that's not what but we know that Hashem is right there. This is the garments of Hashem. And this is what the Rebbe gives this analogy from the king. We don't fear his body, we fear him the way he's manifest via the body. And the same thing, all this which we see is the body of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the garments of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I mean, to say it embodies the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or it's a body to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it's what we see is the outer layer of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But this is the Hashem, which is invested in these garments, or invested in this body, which we're able to see with our physical eye. So it doesn't compromise the fact that we don't see that our appreciation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's riyas einei seichel. It's with our intellectual eye. Seeing something with your intellectual eye is exactly the same, and the same connection to this which you're seeing with your intellectual eye as this which you're able to connect to with your physical eye. That's the point of vision over audio, over hearing something, right? A witness, a judge cannot be a witness, because once he sees this, or once he's a witness, he witnesses the case, he cannot be the judge to that case, because the judge has to be objective to be able to see. There may be a different side of the story, but if he saw it, he cannot be a judge, because there's something which you click to something, you connect to something based on seeing something with your own physical eye, much more than this which you hear, even though it was very convincing, but nonetheless you didn't see it. So that clarity which comes through vision, that unique clarity that comes through vision, is equal when you see something with your physical eye as you see something with your intellectual eye. In this case, the Alter Rebbe says you could mamish use the same exact analogy of a physical king, which he's a physical king, but nonetheless it's not the physical facade, his body, it's the royalty, the kingship, the spirit of kingship which is transmitted through the body. It's the kingship which is transmitted through is manifested via the body. And the same thing, it's Hashem via his garments, this again which you see evidently with your physical eye, which is the outer layers of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but Hashem is right there. That is Hashem with his garments. The Rebbe adds in the bracket something interesting. He says you can see this overtly also, and we could all appreciate, if you see the style of the Alter Rebbe, you could appreciate why he puts it into Haggah, not a brackets, into Haggah. And there's like a note. And we can see this also, the fact that the prostration of the heavenly army, in other words, starting from the sun, you see the sun is towards its orbits towards the western side of the universe, because Shechina B'Mayrav, the divine presence, famously known as in the Mayrav. He looked also in the way we went into the Beis Hamikdash. It started from the east towards the west. The Holy of Holies was towards the west of the Beis Hamikdash, which again contained the Ark, the Holy Aron. Kodesh HaKadoshim was on the western side of the Mishkan, or the western side of the Beis Hamikdash as well. So Shechina B'Mayrav, and therefore you see, the Alter Rebbe says, even you can see also externally of the bittul, the spirit of submissiveness or nullity from the Tzva Shamayim, starting from the sun, how it orbits towards the west, because the Shechina B'Mayrav, the divine presence is in the west. And it says Alter Rebbe concludes that someone didn't see the king ever, and he doesn't recognize the king, but he goes into the courtyard of the king and he sees many ministers and dignitaries bowing down to one person, it falls upon him as well, a fear and awe. Similarly to this, which we're able to appreciate even in the external dimension, in other words, even Hashem's garments, like the sun and the heavenly army, as the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe, which based on the pasuk Tzva Shamayim L'cho Mishtachvim, that even the Tzva Shamayim prostrate themselves to you externally as well. So back to the Lashon where we left off, Elah Ikir Wahergel. Elah Ikir Wahergel, the Lahargil Daite Machshavte Tomid. The main thing is one to accustom himself, to accustom his mind, to accustom his thought constantly. Lias Kavua Belibe Umechi Tomid, that it should be established in his heart and in his mind, Tomid, constantly. Constantly, you see again, that it in other words, this term, without any interruption, whatever he sees, able to see with his eyes, Hashamayim, the heaven, the earth, and everything that fills the heaven and the earth, these are all the external garments of the King, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu Hashem. When you put it into the right perspective, the true perspective, the accurate perspective, that this is, whatever you see, heaven and earth, is solely the garments of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and through this, Yizker Tamid al Pnimiyusam v'chayusam, you will be able to remember, again, Tamid, constantly, the Pnimiyus of these garments, which is Hashem, and the vitality and the chayis, the energy of these garments, which is ultimately Hashem. So when one looks at the King, and if you think about it, by the way, when you look at the King, how much of his body do you see? Very little, a small percentage. A king comes on royalty, so there's the royal attire, and if it's cold, he's wearing a coat, and he's wearing his shoes. So you see a little bit, you see the face of the King. So someone's going to say, well, the majority of that image, I don't fear the majority of that image. And especially I was standing on the sides, I just saw a tiny bit of the face of the King. I don't fear this individual. If I saw him more, it would be a different story. And everybody appreciates that's nonsense, because you're looking at the King, and you're looking at that garment, that attire. You know that it's the attire which is the King's. It's the King's attire. You know the King is all that spirit of this kingship spirit is coming through that whole entire image. Even though physically the significant majority of the King is covered with his attire, with his garments, but no one limits and say, I was able to get a glimpse, a little bit of him, and the rest really is meaningless for me. That's not true, because the entire image of the King is what arouses this fear, this reverence, this awe. Irrelevant. Naturally, there's something you see, the face of the King, the expression of the King, but it's not because you see the physicality of the King. It's because he's able to express, like any human being, his expression comes from the face. The pnimius comes out through the face. That's why, for that matter, they're both called panim. Panim means face, but as well means the pnimius. That exists by every single person, so sometimes you can appreciate the King's expressions, which come through the face. But it's not because you see the physicality of the King. And what if you see his neck? His neck looks different than any other neck of any other person. No. You know that everything about him, about this image, everything about him throws, expression Yiddish, varfta pachad. It arouses this awe. And at that point, it doesn't matter. You're looking at the entire image, even the part of the King, which is the significant part, for that matter, the significant part of the King is enveloped in a garment, in an attire. and covered up. In other words, the physicality of the king is covered up by his garments. But every part of that entire image arouses this reference. And so too, and anybody think differently, in other words, we know that that is the case. And the same thing when we think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So if you can't see upane lo yiro, but it doesn't make a difference. It's, if you really want to, for example, the people who see the king on the side or even the back, there's still an awe has been extracted from one's from that experience. Even you see the back of the king as well. You don't even see anything of his skin, of his face, of his physical body. That is, you only see the garment. You only see the attire, his hat, and so on. His crown. As opposed to those who are standing in the front. Obviously, again, there's something very special about seeing the face of any person that exists in any type of connection, for that matter. The Gemara marvels about those Talmidim which were able to sit in front of the master as opposed to the Talmidim which sat in the back of the master. There's no question. There's something of seeing the face, because the face is this which expresses rather the panemius of the person, no question. But that has nothing to do with this mushal of the awe which is extracted when you see this individual as a king. So the point over here is it's irrelevant that you look at his garments. You know the Guf HaMelech B'Seichem, and so too with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. You establish within yourself constantly, tell me that whatever you see in heaven and earth is just the garment of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Hashem is right there. And that allows Yizker, you remember Tommy, the Pnimiusam Achayusam, the inner energy, and the inner life, and the Pnimius, the inwardness of this which you see, which is ultimately HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is also included in the word Emunah. Emunah is belief. Belief in who? Belief in Hashem. Okay? But in the Alter Rebbe adds over here, it is in conjunction. This term Emunah itself is in conjunction to everything what we learned till now, and particularly this very last message. Emunah is like a craftsman. A craftsman is not just like, okay, he knows how to put together a silversmith, for example, knows how to put together a becher, a nice beautiful cup, a goblet or whatever, a silver cup from a chunk of silver. So he's a silversmith. And he produces all these beautiful work, masterpieces. But the point is, he's called a umon. It's not like by chance that he's doing something and he's successful to put together a certain beautiful cup, as an example, dish, utensil. No. He's an umon. He is the professional. He's the expert. Everything about him, he looks at a piece of metal differently. And therefore he's usually successful to produce on a constant basis these beautiful pieces. Because this is who he is. It's not like he is one person and he periodically taps into some idea of putting together some beautiful pieces from these chunks of silver, as an example. No, he's an umon. He really trained his hands. His hands are trained. What do we do? The expression, whatever he touches is gold. What does that expression come from? Which means the person, this smith, this craftsman, his hands are trained to produce these pieces with success. That's the similar, and that's why it's called a umon. And that is the idea of emunah. Emunah also has the connotation of regilus. Shemargil ha'odam es atzmei. He accustoms himself. This is who he is. It's looking at things on a constant basis with the correct perspective. And this is the way the person trains himself, that whatever he sees, again in this context, whatever he sees, everything, it's all the garments of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There is Hashem. That is Hashem. Though I see, my eye catches the physical garments. When you identify, or when you custom your mind to look at Olam in that manner, you're basically constantly together with focusing on perfect relationship or relating to and with Hashem. And that is the Lashon Emunah. Emunah also has, again, Margilas Atzmi. So again, this also tells us that Rebbe used Lashon Tamid. You have that tzmidius, that constancy, just like when you have with a expert, a silversmith as an example, or any craftsman. Uman is not necessarily a silversmith, using just that as an example, but any craftsman. If it's a carpenter, carpentry is who he is, because everything about him, he accustomed his hands to work in this particular fashion. Everything about him is this which he does and which he lives for. In other words, this which he represents. And so too, when you think about the identifying of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this fashion is Margilas Atzmi. You custom yourself that whatever you see is only, again, the levushim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the garments of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem is right there. And that gives you that clarity, that transparency of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it's about emunah, margila adam satzmi, accustoming yourself. This is who you are. Rebbe concludes the chapter and says, "V'gam lizikarim taught me that it should be constantly on your mind. Lashon Chazal, Kabbalah said Malchus Shamayim, accepting the yoke of heaven. Shukinyan saying Tasim Melech HaMelech. It's similar to the idea of establishing, placing upon yourself, putting yourself under the total domination of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, dominance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, accepting the yoke of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And again, that's the same tasim, compelling yourself, like he's explained with Malcolm Achar elsewhere, namely in the beginning or the message of the 41st chapter, which you can go ahead and see as well anytime, on this website for that matter. Because the Eibishter leaves the heaven and the supreme, superior worlds and the inferior worlds, and places his malchus, a sense of reignship, sense of kingship, upon us, and not only as the klal, but not only as part of the collective, but as an individual. That's what the Alter Rebbe writes, b'chulu, etc. Like we learned in the very beginning of the 41st chapter, that Hashem needs a love about every yid as an individual, and that connection, that malchus is on part of the person as an individual, not only as part of the collective. And that was again one of the revolutionary statements of the Alter Rebbe in the 41st chapter, which becomes a center theme in the life of the Yid. Hashem leaves everything, and he's interested to know how you're serving. Not only to know, his whole interest is to appreciate and as such needs that submission of yours as an individual. And he cares every single thing you do, speak, think, and so on. And that obviously arouses an additional sense of reverence for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's a melech not only al kol ha'olam, but on you as an individual. Again, we elaborated on then based on the Gemara. Man was created an individual. Again, we're not going to go into it right now. And why is the Alter Rebbe all of a sudden coming over here with this Kabbalah and Malchus Shamayim? We could perfectly appreciate it. Because sometimes, and especially in this chapter, it's about that familiarity with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Become very familiar. When you learn this chapter, there's a total new dimension of familiarity with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Naturally, that extracts the awe of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because I see him, and namely because of the Moshe Rabbeinu within the Yid, and therefore it's only regular and the norm of the within the Yid, the Yira, the fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, based on that pasuk which the Gemara elaborates, or the Gemara deals with, that very pasuk with Moshe Rabbeinu, which Alter Rebbe begins the 42nd chapter of Ma Hashem Elokecha She'elamim Chakim Liyira. That the indication again, Moshe Rabbeinu saying Yiras Hashem, true Yiras Hashem. Remember, we're talking about true Yiras Hashem is the norm and the default of every single Yid, because, and Alter Rebbe says that's because of Moshe Rabbeinu within you. So there's a certain, which again causes that familiarity in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But yet we have to know, yes, you're familiar with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Don't forget, you're not buddy with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's your God. He's your king. We are, at the end of the day, his subjects, but not only we are, you as an individual. Also this constant acceptance of the Oil Malchus Shemayim, the yoke of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of the heavenly kingdom, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Sim Tosim Alecho Melech. We have to work on it because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from his perspective, he leaves everything. Yes, he is the creator of all the infinite amount of worlds and malachim and camps of malachim, as the Gemara says, and he leaves all that, and he's interested in what you're doing as an individual. So the Alter Rebbe starts Oleinu as part of Am Yisrael, but V'chulu, in the end of the day, it's about you. And therefore, yes, the familiarity, yes, the awe, but the awe has to lead to that total submission to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way it comes across in Torah Semes, learning Hashem's Torah, doing His mitzvahs, and as articulated in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Shulchan Aruch, which is in the Sefer of Halachas, of the actual law. Which we ought to follow scrupulously. That's what he says, Mikabel, because this is what it is by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, Hashem, with all that greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem has his eyes fixated on us, how we submit ourselves to him. And as such, we, in turn, Mikabelim, we are accept upon ourselves this Malchus Shemayim. We utter these words every single day. Malachim, the Yid, it's about, in the end of the day, a submissiveness. It's about submissiveness, submitting oneself, rather, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, receiving, accepting oneself through the appreciation and familiarity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which arouses a sensation of fear, which usually fear and awe do lead to doing what the king wants me to do, and the submission to the king. But it's beyond that. You cannot leave it as a sensation of fear and reverence. It's about Kabbalas El Malchus Shemayim, accepting the yoke of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we do. V'anachnu mekablim. Again, as collectively and individually. Also, this is one of the ways that it comes out overtly within the 24 hours, is generally via prayer. Prayer in general, the entire prayer that's when even externally we demonstrate our submission to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But within prayer itself, particularly when it comes to the Amidah, the Shemana Yisrei, when we come, well, there's the Gemara expression, the expression of the Gemara, we stand in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ke'avde kamamara, like a servant in front of his master. That's what the Amidah is. And again, externally, even there's halachas, you cannot even blink to someone, hint something to somebody. You're standing with a complete, overt submission to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, overtly. And externally, everything about you stands in that state of submission to Hashem. But within the Amidah itself, where do you even see it emphatically, is much more rather emphatic, is when in the time of prostration. You bow, Baruch Atah Hashem, which is the prostrations which exist within Tfilas Yudches. In the prayer of the Amidah, the Shemana Esrei, after you accept upon yourself the yoke of heaven verbally by Kriyat Shema, which that's the point of Kriyat Shema. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Remember the Mishnah? The Mishnah says, why does Shema come before Vayim Shemaya? Well, it is written before the Shema, but why did we recite it? And in the Torah order, it is written. This is Vayis Chana, this is later in Akev. But why do we say this parsha before? The Mishnah says, and then you're Mekabel Hashem's mitzvahs, meaning to say you accept upon yourself the yoke of heaven, and then you accept upon yourselves Hashem's edicts, Hashem's mitzvahs. Because you probably compromise in the mitzvahs, in that fulfillment of Hashem's mitzvahs, if you didn't accept upon yourself the yoke of heaven. It's like a yoke also. And they go tell the cow, plow the field. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll invest 60% of his effort. But if you put the yoke on to the cow, so then you have this total submissiveness of the cow. And this is what we do. In other words, in order to plow, in order to be productive, we're mekabel oil malchus shemayim. This is the point of the Mishnah. By saying Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Hashem is our God. And Hashem is one. And so again, as we mentioned, it's the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu which filters through our system. Hence, it's about Him. So then obviously we'll submit ourselves through Hashem's mitzvahs. And actually, even the first parsha, it's about right away we have the mitzvah of limud Torah, and then the important mitzvahs, or these great mitzvahs. Every mitzvah is great, but these unique mitzvahs of tefillin and mezuzahs, and then we go on which includes all the mitzvahs. But you have to accept upon yourself, and the one has to accept upon himself. Again, says the mission of the Kabbalah is El Machal Shemayim. So the order of prayer in this context, the Alter Rebbe is contrasting, or he's noting the connection, the sequence, and the juxtaposition of Kriyat Shema and the Amidah, because Kriyat Shema, we accept upon ourselves formally the yoke of heaven, and we stand up by the Amidah. There you see the Yid's complete, even external, overt demonstration. It's a demonstration of the Yid's complete and overt submission to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and more so in the time of his bowing down, at the time of his prostrating himself in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And again, because there, by Kriyat Shema, it's accepting about Hashem with speech, via, again, verbally, and then lachzer l'kabel b'pel mamish b'maisa. And then from that leads to the Amidah, to the Shemona Esrei, to accept one upon oneself in actuality, b'pel mamish b'maisa, with action, which is the demonstration of the experience of one standing in that particular image, and namely bowing down to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Baruch Atah Hashem, which is an action, which demonstrates that Kabbalah's oil, accepting the yoke of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is Baruch Makom Acher, like it's explained elsewhere. Have a wonderful evening.